I'm Barkho, and today I'll be having a go at lacing the scales that I've made, which are actually to scale of these scales, which are example of lacing late Assyrian bronze scale armour, trustees of the British Museum. So these were the scales, and this is a lacing pattern that's been used, which is undoubtedly incorrect, although there is parts of it that I do agree with. So let's have a look at what I've got here. Here is an example of the lacing method that I've been able to come up with, which you can see is makes use of this space much more efficiently than those. In the British Museum, you can see they've laced them together in this fashion. And what I mean by that is the stitching goes in this hole, or from the back into this one, then out this one in a zigzag fashion, and then likewise again in this fashion, which leaves a zigzag here, no zigzag here, but there is one on the back, and so forth and so forth. I believe that if you were to use this type of stitching, you would also fill in the gap area, so that would be full of crosses the whole way through. And if you were to do that, you'd get 4 threads holding the 2 rows together instead of just the 2. But on top of that, you notice that actually the scales are put in this order, which is an order that I agree with as well. So based on other examples that I've experimented with, the secret to knowing which way to lace or place the scales on top of each other is a dead giveaway are the two small holes that you see on towards the middle here. However, on this one it's a little bit lower. So what you do is, if that's where my hole location is, that has to cover the next hole. So you see how now these 2 holes are both exposed, and now this one is the only one that's exposed. And then if you were to continue, you're not exposing those holes continuously all the way to the end, so that only one little section of these holes are exposed. And what I've noticed is that's the way that you usually begin. Some scales usually have the 2 side holes on the right side of the scale as well, but here in this case it's on the left. And to be honest, it's just, if it was on the left, you'd be doing things the opposite way. So you'd layer them in this fashion, which is the opposite to what a 2-hole system on this side would be. Anyway, these are some examples. The prototype that I made was out of sheet metal, and this is not the actual one. This is the first one that I made. I didn't like the way that the holes were lining up, so I misplaced the holes when I was drilling. You can see this one's slightly too far to that side. So what happens is, once a scale sits up here and lines up with that raised rib, you tend to sometimes get a covering of that hole, which is not what you want. Those holes are meant to line up with your mid rib. Anyway, so I remade this one. So this should give you, that's my good one that I did. So it's still made out of sheet metal, in this case sheet metal aluminium. The whole design is cut to scale. So what I originally did was blew up the picture, selected one particular scale that I thought was a good representation of the scales in general, and then made copies of it, cut them out individually, and blew them up to the same size that is on the British Museum website. So these are some other ones that I've done. That's this one. The silicon mold that I've got on the table over there is giving me these shapes. So what you do is, once you pull them out of the mold, you got to tidy up the edges a little bit, pierce all the holes, and then you can proceed. And if you were to paint them, they'd have to be painted and dry before you even start wanting to stitch them together. So it's still quite a bit of work after you've actually made your prototype, and then from the prototype you've made your silicon mold, and then you've poured your resin. There's still quite a process before you actually get to the stage of stitching them. Now here, what I'd like to do is the same thing that I've done with some of the other pieces, is I'm producing the pieces here, and then what I'll do is I'll also make another silicon mold of possibly four or six pieces at a time. So I'll make another silicon mold of this batch of 6, and then that way I can cast 6 pieces at the same time instead of one at a time from this silicon mold. So the reason why I only did one in the first place and not cast both of them is because I want consistent results. And if I cast one and then make copies of that one that has been cast, then what happens is you get a much more consistent result. And now I know that all these copies are the same as that one. So when I make a silicon mold to then reproduce 6 copies, they're all going to come out the same as this. Now, that was the same methodology used to create this one. This one you can see some other different types of ancient Assyrian scales, and these are actual ancient Assyrian scales. Most of them have been taken from this particular reference, and here you can get an idea of what that reference looks like. These are some examples. For example, this plate represents iron armor scales found in Nimrod. That's ancient Kalhu. And here you can see these are all iron scales. That's a rectangular scale. Here you've got some curved, thin, narrow scales, some curved scales, and you notice this one's got a 6-hole system. This one's got a 7-hole system, and this one here looks like it's 5 because you got 2 holes here, 2 holes here, and 1 hole here. But if you look closely, what's happened is there's a chunk missing. So I believe that the artist, if this is not a printing error from the actual book itself, then this is to represent that chunk there is actually missing from the scale itself. So when he drew all of it, and then that part that was missing he left out. And if that's the case, then I believe that when you compare this so-called 5-hole system to other ancient Assyrian scales with 5 holes, you tend to see that there seems to be, in majority of cases, holes above and below the scale. So it's possible that this could actually have a 6-hole system, which would have been at the bottom of this rib, but is not shown here because that chunk is actually missing from the actual artifact itself. So here in this case, we've got bronze armor scales from Nimrod. Again, Kalhu, ancient Assyrian city of Kalhu. And then if you're wondering, so for example, that type there has been reproduced at a scale that is according to the measurements given in this source, and here is that scale. That one there is there. So that's my rendition of that. That one there is a number called 336, and that actually has a picture here showing the lacing system that's been used in this example. And again, you see, actually that's a 335. However, when you go and you look at this picture, you got 309 type, which is a bronze, and you got a 309 type here drawn as well, which is a drawing of how they think that the plates would have sat, which is incorrect, and I'll show you why. And that scale is 309 right here, which is this one here that I've reproduced to scale. Okay, so that one there, which is a 6-hole system, is the 309 type 12C, which has been catalogued in this thesis. So in this section of the catalogue, for example, you got 309, and he goes in to give an ND number. I think that's got to do with the details of the actual artifact itself. And then Malawan is the person obviously who excavated it in 1966, and he also says that there's 100+ scales of this particular type in existence, or that Malawan excavated. The height has a minimum size of 3.89 to a maximum size of 4.02 centimeters. That's in height, and then width is 1.45 to 1.5 centimeters. So that's where I'm getting the dimensions. I've got the dimensions here, I've got the picture here, and then all I have to do is just blow up that picture to get these sizes, and that gives me a chance to be able to experiment with them on paper first. And once I'm satisfied with the way that they're looking, then I'll make a prototype and then cast, make a silicon mold of it, and then cast copies from there. So that's a little bit about the work that I'm doing now in regards to that. But yeah, so what we wanted to do was now demonstrate. Oh, by the way, he also has, so he's got the images here, some images of the scales that have been excavated. These are not all. There are some types that are not shown here. For example, if you go here, type 1, type 2, type 3, type 4, type 5, type 6, type 7, type 8, type 9, type 10, 11, 12, 13, 14, 15, 16, 17, 18, 19. And then here, he doesn't give types, because these are the armor scales, which he believes are much more difficult to give a type, because the whole system is not 100% identifiable on the actual artifacts themselves. So anyway, there is also this section, which is an actual part of his thesis, where he goes in to describe the artifacts themselves, the metal, the type of metals that were used, and an analysis of the actual metals themselves, which in this case were iron and bronze. They find that it's been mildly carburized iron, and the bronze is bronze, so copper and tin alloy. So that section there is about the actual armor, and then here you've got your catalogue of all the different armor scales that have been found, and here is the actual representations of some of those that have been catalogued here. And these are some representations that have been taken of ancient Assyrian reliefs to demonstrate some of the shown in ancient Assyrian reliefs shown, which are represented here in this thesis as well. But these types here, the 309 and the 335, I think are imperative to study, to figure out what's going on with the ancient Assyrian stitching. Okay, so let's begin by analysing these particular scales. Now, it has 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 7 holes in the scales, and that is pretty much consistent with all the scales that are in the British Museum of this particular type. So all of them are a 7-hole system, and now that I've got the image from the actual British Museum, so it's a collection object W_1970-0307-1. Anyway, I'm having a look. Cultures, period, Neo-Assyrian. Production date, 8th century BC, 7th century BC. And we have a find spot, excavated find spot, is Ardabil with a question mark, Asia, Middle East, Iran, Northwest, Ardabil. Materials, copper alloy, obviously bronze. Dimensions, here is what's crucial. So the length is 6.5 centimeters circa each. So approximately 6.5 centimeters, and the width 4 centimeters circa each. So approximately. So because it seems like there is some variation between each individual scale in the original, not much, but there is, because they would have been handmade. What I did was I selected the scale, this particular scale to print off. I selected from the bottom left hand corner, the very last one, and used that as my sample. So what I did was I blew this image up, cropped it and blew it up to exactly 6.5 centimeters, and then whatever the distance was, which was in this case 3.75 centimeters. So you can see the circa come in. So some would have been 3.75, some would have been 4, some would have been 3.8, 3.9, and then the length as well. Here you have 6.5 centimeters. This is my prototype, and here we're going to measure it. You can see that's 6.5, which also has a width of 3.75, almost 3.8. And then these copies. So we have here a width of 3.75 centimeters and the length of 6.5, 6.4948, 6.5. So we can see that these are truly to scale. What they aren't, however, is the correct weight. Now, the original pieces in the British Museum, each individual scale weighs 10.5 grams each. When I weighed these out on the scale, I was getting 4, sometimes 5 grams each. So these are approximately just under half the weight of what the original bronze pieces would have been. Okay, so that's an analysis of the actual individual scales. Now, here is what I think has happened. Now, these have been my go-to sources. You have from the State Archives of Assyria, an article that was written in 2011-2012, Scale Armours in the Neo-Assyrian Period, a survey, Fabrice de Baker, very interesting article in which he goes into an analysis of the different types of armor used not only by people but for armored vehicles such as their siege engines and chariots, and also the armor for horses as well, and animals in general. So this is a very good general overview, and it has a fantastic bibliography as well, not to mention images that he's used to give you an idea of what's going on. You can see here some are from ivory carvings. He's got images of actual scales, images from bronze, the bronze gates of Shalmaneser, images from Ashurnasirpal's sculptures, his bas-reliefs, and some images of the types of scales that were excavated, in this case by Lamellar. And here is some images of actual scales that have been excavated. So that's a very interesting read. This is a go-to. That's why I've got these printed out, so that they can be on hand instead of me looking at a screen all the time. The next one would be the thesis called Late Bronze Age Scale Armour in the Ancient Near East, an experimental investigation of materials, construction and effectiveness with a consideration of socio-economic implications. Thomas D. Hewlett in 2002. So I've printed out the sections that are relevant for me, which was the back end, the images. I've read the thesis, but I wanted images at my disposal, so I can flick through and reference and see and compare and see what's going on. And in it, he has a selection of ancient scales found in the city of Nuzi in Iraq today, and these are in the Harvard Semitic Museum, actually the Harvard Near East Museum now. And here is some other pictures of the actual scales. Here's something very interesting. These Nuzi scales that have been fused together have a whole system that's identical to this that I've made. Now, not only is it identical in regards to the whole system, but here I've got the square ends, they have the round ends. You can see them. And what you can see is the image. You can see how you can get that of what's happened in the archaeological evidence. So these, to me, have been stitched in the two rows across. So you can see there's a stitch there and there's a stitch there. But when you place it, you get pretty much the same thing that's happening on the reliefs. In the archaeological data. So, yep. And then they have another row that's been flipped the other way, and you can see that's been pretty much in a fashion that would mimic that. So here, these are all fused together now. The originals are actually all fused together, but you can get an idea of what's going on in regards to why they're in this position. It's because they were not stitched together into a complete uniform. I don't think these were actually pieces that were probably part of a repair kit, as has been suggested by some other historians and archaeologists. But this is a very, very crucial thesis, especially in regards to Pharaoh King Tutankhamun's body armor. And here is some more examples from Nuzi and their types. And most of these were excavated in the 1930s. Here are some more Nuzi type scales, as suggested by Kendall in 1974. So here is an image of an ancient Assyrian relief. Here again, I can tell by the styles that, although it doesn't state it here, that these are from reliefs from Tiglath-Pilesar's times. from Kalhu, the city of Nimrod. And here it says possible appearances of armor made from Nuzi type 1 scales. So he's identifying the reliefs as a particular type of scale, which is this particular type here, or type I, type 1. These are type 1s, which are unperforated and have a distinctive half circle around the edge, and a raised rib as well, offset, so it's not in the center of the actual scale. Now, be that as it may, this was the particular type of scales that we saw earlier, all fused together. However, the whole system in that is in the opposite direction. So the 3 holes up at the top, so you got that center hole, and then the 2 holes are on this side, and these are on the other side as well. So you got that hole which remain the same. These 2 that stitch the rows are in the opposite direction in these fused scales here, which are from New Zealand. I'll come back to that system, but what's very interesting is in regards to King Tutankhamun's body armor is those areas where you could see the threads and how they're going through the lacing, and he identified those sections were actually the sleeves of the garment, so that the bodice had a material backing and used a 5-hole system, and the scales on the shoulders, arms area had no backing and were constructed in a manner that would qualify supposedly as a type of Lamellar in construction. And we'll get back to actually no, not get back to it. Here you can see this sample is not King Tut's scales, but the whole system is the same as those for King Tut's scales here in the shoulders, and I specifically made this to mimic that type of stitching that you see here. And I've actually done some battle damage, so after I stitched it together, I got a metal sword and started hacking away, trying to see how good the stitching was going to be. So you can see it's been damaged, but it's still holding up relatively well. It's all together now, and that's because your stitching here at the back is not broken, which is what you see in this image of King Tutankhamun's armor. Now, I didn't do the full thing, so what he has is from every hole there's 2. So there's 2, one going from this hole to that hole, and then one going from that same top hole to this scale as well. So you can see what's going on. They're meant to crisscross, so you cross them, they come out the front, and then go back, and then cross to the next scale, and so forth down the actual rows. However, considering this type of body armor, it would have been even more secure had I have done it completely, which is also these sections here should have been crisscrossed over as well. So we can see that in this example, sometimes there are holes that are used by more than just one thread. And it goes to reiterate the importance of what I had suggested in my earlier video on Ancient Assyrian Scale Armour, where I want as many threads going through as possible. In this case, you've got your 2 rows that have been, your 2 threads that stitch each row together, but then you also have, for example, that's 1, that's 2, that's 3, that's 4, that's 5, that's 6, 7, 8, 9, and I could have went even more, crisscrossing them, so that each individual row has got its own stitching as well. So you can see the importance of that idea. I want more than one chance, and you can see the effect. And to be honest, had I have done that, even this split wouldn't have been open, because this scale would have been connected to this scale here, and that scale up there would have been connected to this scale as well. So that just goes to show how sophisticated and how knowledgeable the ancients were when they were constructing these body armors. You can see there's no gaps There's no gaps. They're still relatively flexible, like dough, to be able to flex over your body. So that's what this specific representation or little experiment of mine was for, to test out that particular style of lacing system. Hill's work is one of my favorite theses I've ever read. Here's another example of a section of Tutankhamun's armor showing the cross lacing. Here's another bit of it as well. Such a shame that it went from being a full, complete, altogether piece of body armor. Now it's tattered and in pieces, in a state of deterioration that cannot be reversed, and it's such a shame. So I really thank Hild for his work in trying to preserve what's left of King Tutankhamun's Bronze Age, late Bronze Age body armor. And here is some examples or suggestions of alignments of overlap in the scales. The actual bodice, the bodice part of King Tut's armor had backing to it. However, the sleeve part did not. And here is a suggestion. You notice cross-lacing method of lacing scales with lacing hole pattern 5. So in this case, this scale has the 2 and then 4 here, and then the 1. And that 1 up at the top is here, using it to stitch each individual scale to the backing cloth. So in this case, King Tut's armor, to me, would suggest that the part that's actually stitched on to the bodice is more of a scale type construction, but the arms, the shoulders of King Tut's armor seems to be Lamellar fashion. And here is an example of that crisscross lacing that's done on the back, which is very effective, as I have experienced with my little experiment. So it's a magnificent work, and I recommend it to anyone who's interested in ancient Near Eastern armor. It's amazing. And here he's done how should I say it? He's trying to differentiate the scales. Here is a 3-hole system, here is a 5-hole system, a 7-hole system, 7 holes, 9 holes, 5 holes. And what I was doing was I was using the Assyrian scales, the evidence for the Assyrian armor scales, to see which one does it fall into, which categories of Hild's work do those Assyrian scales fall into, and there might be a reference to a lacing system that would be adequate for the Assyrian scales as well. However, you'll soon see that it's very different to King Tut's armor in that respect. Now, this research in general is also very crucial to trying to understand the Nuzi armor as well. So that's another work. Here we go. Then we've got Late Assyrian Arms and Armor, Art versus Artifact, Amy Barron in 2010. This is her chapter that's on Ancient Assyrian Armor, and it's a good study. But I can see her two major references that she's drawn a lot from is here, Hewlett's study. So that's his thesis, and she's also drawn a lot from John Curtis's thesis as well, which although was done in 1979, only recently got published in 2013. And this is one of my favorite references, if not the Bible of my entire research. And what I like to do is I like to use one source as the one that I deem the most factual, the most accurate, and then these are my satellite sources. So in one way, shape or form, this is my biblical reference, and then these are my secondary go-tos. If I can't find what I'm after here, then I'll start searching here to find answers to questions that I might have. And don't forget, there is a lot more sources as well. let me see. I think there is another source that's very important. I have seen. Let me see here. Okay. Some axe heads, late Assyrian archery equipment. Yeah, must have closed that window off. It was a small article, but a good article written on the Nozi armor. I think it was by Thomas, I believe. Anyway, when I find that reference, I'll what's it called? I'll put it in. But here, John Curtis's work is amazing, especially when it comes to an examination of late Assyrian metalwork. And what he had done in his thesis was he had given descriptions and then catalogued all the items. And after cataloguing them, he also provided images. So it was a monumental work and deserves every credit. However, we'll go into some of his ideas very soon. So with John Curtis's thesis, An Examination of Late Assyrian Metalwork, chapter or page 44, W armor scales, he talks about ancient Assyrian armor, and straight off the bat, the vast majority of Assyrian armor scales come from Nimrud, which is ancient Kalhu, with just a few examples from Kuyunjik, that's Nineveh, and Sharaf Khan. Off the top of my head, I don't remember what that is. But anyway, expeditions to Nimrud registered more than 400 bronze scales, to which must be added an unspecified number found by Layard in Chamber 1 of the Northwest Palace, 1850s. Two bronze scales come from Nineveh. Iron scales are rather more numerous. Layard reports collecting 2 or 3 basketfuls of round-ended iron scales from near the floor of Chamber 1, and around 600 iron scales were found by the 1949-63 expedition to Nimrud. I think that was the one under Lamellar. In addition, there are about 30 scales from Sharaf Khan and 1 from Kuyunjik, Nineveh. Anyway, it goes in to describe the typologies, and it's very, very important. And if you want to read to understand Assyrian armor, this is, I would say, the best written academic resource for that. Even better than Amy Barron's, but that's just my opinion. Clearly, both bronze and iron scales were in use at the same time, which is curious. And one thing that they're finding is that the iron scales actually are heavier than the bronze scales, which is counterintuitive. And what I mean by that, bronze as a metal, when weighed out, is generally speaking in the same mass is heavier than iron. So that's unusual. It's not what you would expect. So anyway, what is even more interesting is the relative merits of bronze and iron for armor scales were recently discussed by Mr. Henry Blythe of the University of Reading, who pointed out that copper has a hardness property of circa Bernal 30, soft bronze of circa 85, and work-hardened bronze of circa 180. For wrought iron or mild steel, the figure is circa 100. So right off the bat, you can see that, and for good steel, circa 200 to 230, which so unless you've got good steel, you're not going to beat the work-hardened bronze of 180. So yeah, that's very interesting. People seem to think, just because it's out of iron, So if people are using Bronze Age technology and then they come across people with Iron Age technology, that the iron at those early stages would have been of a significant advantage against Bronze Age weaponry. But that is not the case, especially when you're hitting 180 and you've got about 100 for mild steel or wrought iron. There's a difference. So he goes in then to explain a lot more technical details. That's what I'm saying. You need to get your hands on this source and read it for yourself and see what's going on. There's an interesting section on the actual whether it should be classified as Lamellar or scale, and he goes into a little bit about that. More or less, I tend to agree. And yeah, he goes into the scales that have been found in places other than Assyria, so in obviously Urartu. He goes into the bronze armor found in Nuzi, late Cypriot, 3A period as well. There were armor scales found. So there's many different types of scales that were found. And for example, in Syria and Palestine, at a comparatively early date at Hama, Megiddo as well. So yeah, I mean there's other areas, Hazor as well, Lachish. There have been armor scale found there. In addition, so yeah, he's showing that the North Syrian style shows ivories of North Syrian style show soldiers clad in armor and horses wearing armor coats as well. Yeah. So what's going on now? That's a little bit about the actual armor scales, and then you got the catalogue, and these are the actual items that were excavated. However, unfortunately, not every single item has been shown in his section of images, but there is some. And here we're going to get to the bottom of what's going on with these British Museum scales. So here is the different types of scales found. And these are, for example, types of scales that are found. Bronze armor scales from Nimrud. These are bronze armor scales found from Nimrud as well. So that's like a continuation, these two. And then here you've got iron armor scales found at Nimrud. You can see there's a plate there. But generally speaking, they're relatively small. He goes into to say that the variation in sizes, they vary in size here. These armor scales are generally rounded at one end or rectangular in outline, have an embossed rib in the center, and are pierced with a number of holes so that they can be sewn together. Apart from some especially large plates that are mentioned below, the scales vary in height between 1.35 centimeters. That's very small. So that's like they vary in height, huh? So that's the height of the actual scale to 8.6 centimeters. So 8.6 centimeters is roughly that big. You can see the size of that scale is very big that he's talking about. They fluctuate. You got a height of 1.35 to 1.8. They can be anywhere in between. And we can see here, for an example, these are very small scales. These are a little bit bigger, but then you got these types of scales, and all these have been made to scale as well. Now that's where I've got this is where I'm getting all the typologies of the ancient Assyrian scales from. So these images with the sizes that have been catalogued, like for example, height of bronze type A, type 1A. So when you look up here, type 1A, you see this particular example. So that's these ones here. This specific one has been modeled off that. He gives you a size of height ranging from 6.1 to 6.5, with a width varying from 1.3 to 1.55 centimeters. So that just gives you an indication. So every time you see a particular type you're interested, 289, you just go into his catalog, 289, and then you read about it. He gives you the actual, I think that's the index number. The data was found if there's here one scale height at 2.64 with a width of 1.3. But anyway, in the back here of his images, there is a section which is called Arrangement of Iron Scales from Nimrod. And then at the bottom, which has a description of the entire plate, it says actual arrangements of armor scales above and armor scale shown on Assyrian reliefs. And then British Museum 214552 is this one, 214554 is this one. So he's referenced where these depictions have come from, the ancient Assyrian reliefs. But what I'm interested in is this image and this image. In this image, you see the reference number 336, that's this one right here, 336. And you got 309, that's 309, and that's 335, and there's a typo here, that should be 335, instead it's been misprinted, 355. So that's a misprint there, okay? So these are what I'm interested in here, because these are actual images, and here is the suggestion of lacing, and I'll get into that. And what they've done is they've used this arrangement of iron scales found from Nimrod from 336. They've used this lacing system in order to stitch up this these scales that were found, that have been identified as Assyrian scales, which were found in Idlib in Iran. Anyway, my point is, straight away when you look at this, you see that there is a difference between these scales and the other scales, not only in size but in the actual holes and their arrangement as well. What I mean by that is you have two, one above the rib here, above the actual rib. So that hole there instead is here, and then you got another one directly underneath it. So you can suppose that would be the corresponding hole for that, but there's not another one here on these suggestions. So what they've done is they've used this lacing method for these scales, 336, and put that onto these scales, and these scales have a different hole system to what they've used as a reference. And he goes in to talk about it in regards to lacing. He goes, the method by which the scales were laced together, or at least one of the methods used, in brackets, is known because on one block of iron armor scales, 335, unfortunately he doesn't give the reference plate for 335, he's got 336. 335 is this one here, so that's 336 again, and that's 335 right there. So this is the image that's giving them the answers, and yet this is the most unclear image ever to have been put in a book. But doesn't matter, when you go and you open up that book on your PDF file and you magnify the image it starts to become a little bit clearer. But you would think that this image, which is so important and is the basis to give you this stitching system, there's no images of it. You can't find it. All you got is just this one measly image that's giving you the supposed answers on how to arrange Assyrian scales. Okay, the method by which the scales were laced together is known. Thesis. Because of one block of iron armor scales, 335, that's the actual scale, sufficient remains of the leather thongs for the arrangement to be confidently reconstructed, PLXX. So what's PLXX? Is the plate. So let's go to plate XX. Here we go, plate XX. So this is the arrangement. Again, this must be a typo, or it actually is the 336, because this 336 looks exactly like this 336, and I've printed it out, and then I've tried it to see what I get. But what I get is different to what he's describing. And what I mean by that is, here we go. It's a arrangement to be confidently reconstructed. See, plate XX. Okay, that's the 336 little scale. All right. It is apparent that the scales were first laced into horizontal rows. So we've got our scales. They get laced into horizontal rows. And I always start from the bottom ones. And that will dictate exactly how the placement of the scales are. So in this particular case, it's in this way. Sometimes you have to overlap the scales in this direction, and that is dictated by these particular holes, the holes that are used to string up the pieces. So anyway, you've got an arrangement of holes here. So this stitching, but there is also this stitching which is shown here at the back. So that's correct. I'm down with that. So up until now, nothing's wrong. Whether it's these scales or the scales of the type that were shown in 336. Okay, then attached together. Okay, so it is apparent that the scales were first laced into horizontal rows, and the horizontal rows then attached to each other. There is no special provision for the attachment of the scales to a back cloth. Properly, this type of armor is known as Lamellar. Okay, rather than scale armor. Robinson, 1967, page 3, 7, 218 to 219. Generally, scale armor is made up by attaching each scale to a back cloth. So remember King Tut's armor? The bodice part is attached to a back cloth, but the shoulders are not. The shoulders are like this. Okay, so here to a back cloth with its rounded end pointing downwards. So if this is your rounded end, it'll be pointing downwards. And arranging the scales so that they overlap in an imbricated pattern. So I'm guessing so that they overlay in this way, which has been a method of lacing suggested by. So if you can see how when you look at the middle rib, you will see how the middle rib ends up in the center of the two middle ribs here. That's what he's meaning in that with that word. There are, however, more sophisticated forms, such as the arrangement suggested for a group of iron armor scales from amethyst, because in scale armor, the individual scales are either attached to a back cloth or are securely fixed to the neighboring scales both above and below, as well as to the sides. So for example, you'd stitch your scale to the top and to the side, and to the bottom. A classic example of this is Lorica Squamata from the Roman Empire. Now, he goes into above as well as there are always 2 or 3 layers of metal. Okay, so there's always 2 or 3 layers of metal. So for example, if you hit here, if you hit here, you've got this than that, plus this, so that gives you 2 or 3 places of metal backing behind so that it's harder to pierce. Anyway, scale armor thus provides a lot of protection. So it's not that scale armor is bad, the scale armor is just different. It is, however, extremely rigid. It is, especially if attached to a stiff backing. Lamellar armor, on the other hand, is very much more flexible and allows the wearer much more freedom of movement. For example, this is important. I want you to really take focus on what he's saying here. For example, if a suit of lamellar armor is dropped on the floor, it will concertina. Now let's look up what concertina means, just in case, because I didn't. That's the very first time I've heard that word. Meaning of concertina. You got 2. You got concertina as a noun, which is a small musical instrument played by stretching and squeezing a central bellows between the hands to blow air over the reeds. But the verb concertina is extend, compress, collapse in folds like those of a concertina. So do you see? Lamellar is meant to move. That's, I think, the crucial point of the difference between scale and lamellar. So anyway, keep that in mind. Keep that in mind, and then we'll get back to this. So anyway, he goes on to talk about it. He goes, about the advantages and disadvantages of scale and lamellar and the way to distinguish the two from each other. So anyway, he's insisting to him that Assyrian scales are lamellar and not scale armor. So that's very interesting. That means they should concertina. Now, this method that he's shown as an example, which is taken off actual evidence, which there's no real clear photo of and can't be found in references. So anyway, let's see the comparison. This is what I ended up with. Here it is. This is the 336. So the 336. Now let's have a look at the scale 336. 336 is right here. There you go. It's got 2 holes in the top left-hand corner, 2 holes on the right, just beside the midrib. The midrib, although in the center, is in the lower half of the scale, and you have a hole pierced above the midrib and below the midrib. These are those scales. Although these are not to scale, this is their actual size. So they've used the stitching method here for these tiny baby scales that they have archaeological evidence for, with leather thonging lacing, to then try to provide an example of that. And people are wondering why Assyrian scale armor doesn't work. And this is why, because the example here proposed is incorrect. The observations made, what I'm saying is the observations that were made were incorrect. Here is what you get. Now let's study that sample. We know we've got the scale, the actual armor scale. Now it's the same. The 2 to the side, 1 above the midrib. The midrib is actually a little bit lower than center, and then you have the 2 in the top corner. This is the same scale. This is the same scale being printed out multiple times and then stitched. Now the first stitch goes through there, comes out the back, goes in again, comes out the back, and then the second one goes in from there, goes out the back into that hole, etc., etc. This does not concertina. This does not concertina. This doesn't. So I agree with his description that Lamellar armor should concertina, but I do not agree with the fact that he's writing here actual arrangement of armor scales. Actual arrangement of armor scales. I think they should reinvestigate these. These are primary sources, primary examples. There should be much better photos than these. Come on. We're living in 2021. Not in the Bronze Age, where there's no photography anymore.